I just wanted to quickly introduce Brad Rasmussen. He's with Aqua Engineering. He's our consultant that we've been working with to start looking at what it's going to take to upgrade our plant and meet a lot of those nutrient needs. There's also a couple members of the state that are here to present to you guys. So I'll let Brad figure out on what order they're going in, but I'll let them introduce themselves and then they'll go through their presentation.
So I'm Brad Rasmussen with Aqua Engineering, and we're working on a study for the wastewater treatment plant to determine what we need to do. And I invited both John Cook and John Mackey from the state. They're over the construction department, so they could kind of introduce some of the new rule changes that's going on at the state or have happened that are being implemented and trickling some of this down. And then I'll cover some of the other things we're looking at the treatment plant and kind of what's driving those, just to get everyone updated. So here's John.
Mayor, Council, I'm John Cook. I'm with, like Brad said, I'm with State of Utah Division of Water Quality. I'm here to talk about nutrients and some permitting issues that the city's going to be facing. Let's see if this will work. So nutrients, what are they? Why are they important? And what are the impacts to your community? Basically what we're concerned with is nitrogen and phosphorus. It's fertilizer, or the elements that make up fertilizer. And so, you put your fertilizer on your grass, you get nice green grass. You put fertilizer in your water, and you get nice green water. So we're trying to address this issue and prevent this from happening. It's a national issue. There are a lot of impacted waters, impacted fisheries, recreation, and drinking water supplies, and that's one that concerns us a lot as well. What happens is you have your water body, you have your lake with algae in it, and you got sun and lots of nutrients for it to grow and produce more algae. And while it's growing and producing algae in the sun up, you get lots of dissolved oxygen put into the water. But then when the algae dies off and the sun goes down, that decayed matter pulls the oxygen out of the water, and you get low dissolved oxygen in the water, and you get hypoxia. And that leads to fish kills. Haven't been too many fish kills in the state of Utah, but there have been a couple. And before we implemented a TMDL on Deer Creek used to get algae blooms on it back in the 60s and 70s. And those have by and large been cleaned up by the TMDL. So what we're looking at is we're trying to be proactive here with our nutrient rules. Utah is the fourth fastest growing state in the nation right now. We're expecting the population to double in the next 40 years. More growth means more nutrient loads into our water bodies, and that would lead to more impairment. Just some quick numbers. Right now we're about 3 million people with 300 million gallons a day of sewer effluent, and that translates to about 15,000 pounds of phosphorus loading into our streams and lakes. By 2055, we're looking at close to 6 million people, close to 6 million gallons of water a day, wastewater, and 30,000 pounds a day of phosphorus. And the rivers and streams, probably cannot accept that kind of loading. So as an agency, we're trying to be proactive with our new phosphorus rule. Went into effect, it was adopted by our board January 1st of this year, and it requires total phosphorus on the discharge of 1 part per million. Monitoring became a permit requirement for phosphorus discharge this month of this year. And then the requirement for the plants to meet that will begin in 2020. And we are also working on a nitrogen nutrient rule. Right now, we're in preliminary stages of discussing this. This is what we're looking at right now, would be a total inorganic nitrogen limit of 10 parts per million. Total inorganic nitrogen takes into account ammonia and nitrate and nitrite. And that's toxins and nutrients for algae growth.
Is that in addition to, because that wasn't listed, as far as inorganic nitrogen wasn't listed on that letter that we got from you folks. So is that in addition to that?
This is coming in the future. So this is not a requirement today, but it's something that our agency is looking at now.
So you're just giving us all the bad news at one time?
We're giving you all the bad news now. So this is something, if a major upgrade is coming to your sewer treatment plant, which is what it's looking like, this is something that you're going to want to look at designing for now, because it's coming, or at least making room in the design for this to be accommodated. And I'll let you want to go through the cleaner. Okay.
So the question I was hired for is, so what do we do for Payson? How does this affect you guys? And one thing John talked about was nutrient issues, but we actually have a few additional issues that are coming up that aren't just related to nutrients. So this is a little aerial photo of the existing facility. One of the things that happens in wastewater plants is every 5 years the permits get updated, and they look at what's happening downstream, and they basically make changes in those permits. Other rules change. The nutrients falls into those rules. But one of the big ones that we have is ammonia, changing our ammonia limit. So they have new chronic ammonia standards, which got applied to some of the lower classes of water, which Bear Creek is where the wastewater plant discharges, and its classification didn't have an ammonia limit as strict as ammonia limit. So didn't have it previously, but under the new permit, they're lowering the ammonia limit. So that's one of the issues that we're looking at as far as what to do with the treatment plant. And the purpose of that is basically to protect fish. There's, in addition, I don't know if this comes up later, but in addition, there's some new standards EPA is rolling down based on some aquatic life, basically snails, that could even bring it down more in the future.
Brad, it's hard to tell where it's coming from. If I could ask a quick first question here. We discussed this at the Utah Lake Commission last month, and I asked them to compare the impact of fertilizing on our farms and lawns compared to the impact of our wastewater treatment plants. And they told us then that it's the wastewater treatment plants that have far greater impact than the agriculture. Is that correct? Accurate?
I don't know that exactly. In general, I mean, generally throughout the state, the non-point sources tend to apply more nutrient loads in water bodies than the point sources, which is a wastewater treatment plant. So that's general. Now, in Utah County with Utah Lake, it's kind of an urbanized area. So because of that, there would tend to be a higher load coming from the point sources. So, and I know they're working on actually what they call a TMDL, where they allocate all those. And so even with that being, even if it's a case that it's non-point versus point sources, the position we're in is point sources are regulated. So we have discharge permits, we're allowed to discharge certain amounts of things, and we're required to monitor it, where non-point sources, that's not the case. So from the regulation standpoint, the regulators have the ability to slap the wastewater treatment plant's hands and beat them up through fines and stuff like that. With the non-point sources, which is primarily agriculture, they can give them incentives to do stuff, but they don't have a regulatory authority to say, okay, you're going to jail or you have to pay a fine for this. Therefore, what happens is the point sources get regulated down much quicker than the non-point sources because it can be done. So I don't know if it's necessarily fair, but it's the world we live in. So So this is a comparison, you know, right now, the existing permit that's in place lets us discharge, you know, depending on the season, between 12 and 14 parts per million. The new permit's basically dropping in between 4 and 8. So that's a substantial drop that we have to address. And the way we address this is through tankage and putting air in the water. But this change is in addition to the nutrients that John was talking about. So as I'm planning and looking at things, this is an issue I'm trying to address. The other thing that's happened is chlorine's becoming a bigger issue. And basically, our old permit limit allowed us to put about 2 parts per million chlorine out the discharge of the plant, and the new one is going down to 0.2. So from a chlorine standpoint, we have to look at that because we either have to dechlorinate or put in something different. I'll kind of talk real quick where, you know, when I get to the end anyway, I'll talk about what they are. But these are coming out in the current permit, and we're going to have the phosphorus limit also. So right now, the permit hasn't been issued. They issued a draft permit, and we actually drafted a letter because we had some questions on how this was incorporated. And so we're working with the state to kind of work on those. So another part that makes it a little tricky here is because your effluent actually goes to the cooling towers for the power plant, and they have a discharge permit also. So those end up being intertwined, and pieces are important for one to the other. So we're actually coordinating with the power people, the state, and you guys on trying to work on these numbers. But they aren't. The permit's not issued yet, so I'm not working really hard to get to an end point because I want to firm this down because I don't want to assume one thing and have it change and have to redo it.
But Brett, are we in non-compliance then at this point? Since
No,
we don't have a,
no.
Okay.
So we have I think, is your permit expired, Jeff? Yeah, so we have an expired permit, but they're just following the old permit. But they need to reissue the new one, and we're basically negotiating with them. We want to make sure that the assumptions they made. Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking to them because, I mean, to step into this, the way this is done is they do what they call a waste load allocation. So they're looking at Bear Creek and what pollutants can be in Bear Creek and still protect Bear Creek. And they've recently changed the model they use to do that modeling, and some of the assumptions that have gone into it, and some of the standards. So there's a whole series of things that change. And modeling in wastewater is kind of interesting because there's a lot of assumptions involved in it. So that's what we're trying to sit down and make sure that the assumptions are correct assumptions for this, so that these numbers do two things. I mean, it makes it so it's easiest for the plant to operate, and it protects Bear Creek at the same time. So we're kind of in the middle of that right now and working with it.
I have a question. How does an MBR differ from our style of plant as far as this scenario, this kind of stuff?
Not a lot different. I mean, physically, our plant is what we call activated sludge, and an MBR is technically activated sludge. In that process, biologically, what you do is you take stuff coming in. I mean, we were talking about dog poo in the parks, right? Well, we're talking about people poo here. So you take that coming in and you actually create an environment in our process and an MBR process and put air in there, and the air lets the bacteria grow and they break that food down. But then you have the body mass of the bacteria, and then what you do is separate that out and discharge the water and keep that bacteria mass that you've grown out. So right now, the separation process we use is clarifiers. So they're big round tanks, the bugs settle to the bottom, and then we pull them off. And in MBR, it actually has a physical membrane that sucks the water. So that's technically the difference. Now, the MBR, you get cleaner, pristiner, it gives you a little better treatment quality because those bugs can't go over the top. They just physically can't get through the membrane. So it's a higher technology, and there's places where it works really well, but probably here it would cost a lot of money. They cost a lot to run. There's more disadvantages than advantages, I can tell you right now. I mean, if you got a place that you have some really stringent water quality standards, they fit there real well. If you want to build it on a golf course and put it inside a building, they're really cool for that. But,
So you can use the water to.
so the footprint's smaller. I mean, your plant is set up so you can actually use the water for irrigation. Theirs, you can do it too, and you can even do more processes and use it for other things. But the footprint's really small. It's really easy to put it inside a building, and so you can make it look pretty. That's probably one of their highlights, the water.
And then they can
quality.
use the effluent to water the golf course in this scenario.
Right, yeah, same kind of thing. So that's where they fall in. Where you guys said, the extra money they cost and the maintenance, it's not even something that I'm putting on my radar right now that we really want to evaluate. Because I know enough about them that it probably doesn't fit very well.